We're in the house tonight, and we're going to do a video here in relation to a video that I released a couple days back. And the topic that we're going to talk about tonight is the oaks, the myth of the oaks, and what is the second step that completes that phase to making the, especially small parcels, completely 100% nocturnal. What I see and what I teach, because of past experiences with the power of the oaks, is the oaks, as you know, and we touched on this in the first video, are a very, very powerful piece of the puzzle as far as in the whitetail woods. And the power is often overlooked, misplaced, mistreated, and of the oaks, and it's not formulated or put into the formula of the whitetail's intake as it should. And because of that, it becomes like we talked about in the first video there, it becomes a pressure related issue, more of the deer are, sawing after those or sought after those, that hard mass crop, as much as everyone believes that they just leave the food plots and they just transition to the oaks across the entire country all at the same time. And like I had said before in that video, guys, is there's a couple things to remember on that. Is there's 4 regions in the nation that a oak tree, or the power of the acorns once they hit the ground, are as powerful as they are. There's 4 regions in the U.S. across the whitetail range, and all 4 of those regions all produce acorns, all produce hard mass crop at different times. So if they're all producing hard mass crop at different times, it's all the same mass crop as far as the oak, red oak, white oak, the acorn. But it happens at 4 different times. But what you hear is, going back to the first video here as well, what you hear this theory of all the deer have left our plots and went to the hardwoods, and it all happens at the same, we all talk about it at the same time. And what we're going to chat tonight is understanding what happens on the second step of making that parcel nocturnal, 100% nocturnal. I believe that there's two steps. One, we talked about in the first video, is about the reason that they're not on your food plots, your greens, is because the food plots have been pressured. Now, what I'd like to touch on is, I knew this was gonna raise some yays and some nays, and because it's a topic that a lot of folks really feel that they go the extra mile to keep the pressure maybe off your food plots, or you don't feel like you're over pressuring your food plots, and that's great. I love those comments, because that proves to me that people are, whether the information you're gathering is from me or somebody else, it proves to me that is setting in to a lot of folks that we just can't hunt in the majority of the country like the 5% parcels in the Midwest that can hunt and get away with putting pressure on your food plots. That's a very, very small window in a very, very unique part of the country, the Midwest, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, and parts of Missouri. That's a very small fraction of what you see. So when that mentality is related and pushed onto food plots here in the upper Midwest or the Northeast, it creates, it forces the deer into the oaks. So it makes the power that the oaks have, it makes those that much more powerful going into the season. And the more pressure that is placed on properties, the more that the oaks are going to be a problem or a destination. That's the reason that those deer go to there, is because the higher pressure, the more that they're going to sought after that hard mass. So one thing to keep in mind is, this is something that I experienced years ago, and I try to teach folks, and we talk through with clients. This is one of the things that I touch on. You have to remember that that when you hear the phrase or the saying, it's a mass crop this year, there's so many acorns, that's the reason that all the deer, bucks, everything is gone off my food plots. I'm not seeing anything on the trail cameras, and everything has went to all the deer are in the oaks. You have to remember one thing, and if you remember this, if you don't remember anything else, remember this topic there at this point. The point is this, is the more that the acorn crop is an influential piece of the puzzle in your area. The more acorns that you have, the more that the deer in your area, the herd across your entire region that you're in, the more that they have to have greens. So let's step back and let's think about this for a minute. If the deer in your area have left the food plots and you're not seeing any deer, but deer in general across the whitetail range need, the more acorns that there is, the more greens in the form of brassicas and rye and everything else that's planted for the fall plots. They need more of that. So why is it, if the acorn crop is exploding in your area, and that's what you feel the draw is to that mass crop, so why are they not on your food plots? So that's something that we talk about a lot. I talk a lot to my clients about, is understanding that is a true, that piece right there is a true factor that gets folks starting to think, then there is something missing here. There is something going on that I'm not thinking of, or I've been coached into thinking, or I've took that, like I said, from the deer camp, from the influential, everybody believes this because it's an easy place to lay blame. Now, keep in mind, I want to make this very clear, is I'm not saying that you're the one doing the wrong moves. I'm saying that hopefully you're not the one doing the wrong moves on the farm, or the wrong pressure on any area that you're hunting, public ground included. But the fact of the matter is, guys, is a lot of the pressure that happens to make these deer, to force these deer out of the food plots and into the mass crops, into the acorns, is pressure related. Somewhere in that spectrum of movement throughout from September, when they start hitting the ground, the acorns start hitting the ground, and the pressure kicks in until everyone is talking about this mid-October, there is pressure somewhere. So look outside the box, and that's why I so strongly help neighbors join forces, because if you're in an area, if you're tuning into this and you're in an area that you're hunting, the farm that you own or lease or the public ground piece that you hunt is 400 acres, your neighbor's is 400 acres, and the next guy's 600, then that's a little different situation. That's a big difference. That's a big difference in situation, I should say. Now, but the majority of you that are listening to this are tuning in from high pressured areas or areas that are getting, maybe in the Midwest, that are getting overhunted. And so if you're not doing it, to say that this is not an issue is a false statement, because you might not be doing it, but one of your joining neighbors, 9 times out of 10, a farm or a property that touches your property is doing this, and a farm that touches that property is doing this, and it's a chain effect that causes this mentality, this deer, especially mature deer mentality. So take that into consideration. I'm not pointing any fingers at you in general and saying you are the reason that your deer are not on your food plots, because it very well could be a reason that you are not the problem, but you are suffering because of the lack of putting that foot forward from your neighbors, and it happens all the time. That's why I push to bring communities and neighborhoods together as far as the deer community, because it's a huge influence. Pressure can make or break a property, pressure can make or break an area, and pressure can make or break an entire state. And such as Michigan, there's a lot of guys here, and especially a lot of folks that are tuning in on this channel that I've spoken directly to, male, female, kids, everybody that I've spoke to on this, not only on this topic, but especially here in the state of Michigan, that are stepping up to the plate and are really starting to understand the do's and the don'ts of how of connecting the dots in the whitetail woods in a high pressured state. And the missing link to that is not getting your neighbors on board with this as well. Or even if it's not a, you know, that's why I always push is don't push the trophy on your neighbors, push the unpressure on your neighbors. So at least if they can, you know, they're going to harvest whatever they're going to harvest, and God bless them for being a hunter, and if they're not going to step up to the plate and shoot mature deer, at least the pressure thought process can be lowered, and that's an easier hurdle, guys, than it is to convince a neighbor of trigger management. So when we talk about this pressure issue in regards to food plots, most of the food plots, a very high percentage of the food plots that I go on or to a farm, and we are I'm brought to the farm to inspect properties and start the analysis package, is most of the properties or the food plots on these properties are built internal of the property, and a lot of them are there's not a lot of edge. They're not long linear plots. They're round, easier to plant, and that's what starts this chain effect is interior plots. That's the one thing. So the reason I got the plots on here on this board tonight, and we're going to talk about those, is because just that fact, most of the plots that I see are internal before I get there, and before I work with the folks about, just because it's an opening, is it the right opening? How to create that, and what to really envision down the road about why an internal food plot is so destructive on a small parcel. The second thing that comes into that ties into the topic tonight about when the deer leave the food plots, they go to the oak ridges. That's the theory, is that, you know, the deer are in the ridges. The second step of creating a nocturnal, a 100% nocturnal property, is when the deer supposedly leave the food plots and they go to the oaks, and that's where they're hanging out now. The next step that we're going to talk about is the step that takes that from maybe 50, maybe 75% nocturnal property into 100%. And this right here, let's say there's a stand location right on this ridge, because of it's in the oaks or up on an oak flat. There's a stand location here. There's a stand location up here on the oaks. And the reason that that we hunt these stands is because the deer are now not on the food plots where the tree stands or the blinds used to be here. Now they are not on here. We're not seeing the deer on the food plots. So now we've moved from this location or this location on the food plot. Now the deer are in the oaks. So we followed them to the oaks, and now we're hunting in the oaks, and because that's where they are. That is that seals the deal on making your property nocturnal. And the reason is, guys, is because you take the destination food plot or the destination feed location from here and here. You now take that and you focus that destination into the oaks. So now, instead of this being a destination feed location, your oaks are the destination. So you have the same problem as you had on the food plot. Now you have it in the oak ridges. So now the deer are in the oaks. So the next step that folks think is, what a lot of guys do is a lot of hunters do, is because the deer aren't on the food plots, let's follow them to the oak flats. And mentality, that's a deer hunter's mentality. That's a predator's mentality. You have to follow your prey, right? Well, what happens is, guys, is that is a destination feed location at that point. So the deer are not only using them oaks as because the reason is they're not on these food plots. One of the reasons is because you don't have adequate doe bedding around these food plots. That's why your does, you're hunting in front of the does instead of behind the does, and that habitat isn't correct on the food plots. So now what they've done is they've went to somewhere more secluded to get their requirements on their mast, their woody, their hard mast or woody browse, to meet those requirements on an unpressured situation. So now they're in the oaks. They feel more comfortable. Now they're bedding down over the top of ridges. They're bedding somewhere where there's a higher briar count or whatever it is. And then they're being creative about where they're getting the greens, because like we said, the more acorns that fall, the more greens that they have to have. So just because they're not using your food plots, because your trail cameras aren't showing, they're not showing deer, they're on your food plot, so they must be all in the acorns. Well, I'm here to tell you, there's one place where the deer are going to be. If they're not in your food plots and they're in the oaks and you're having trouble hunting them in the oaks because you're bumping them out of there now every time that you go in or out of that stand location, now in the oaks, because now your destination feed location is your oaks, there's one spot where those deer are going to be, because they have to meet that green requirement. They have to have, they eat between 4 to 6 pounds of total poundage of feed per day, depending on where you're at in the country. Could be 4, 6, 7 pounds a day. That's the national average of what a deer's intake is. 90% of that in our location here, 75% in the south, up to 95% or 90% here in the north, is woody browse. So it doesn't take real long to start doing the math to start understanding that they have to have that. The more woody browse that you get, the more greens that they have to have. They have to fill that gap at some point. They cannot have a 100% woody browse acorn diet. So the theory, like I said, there's one spot that they're going to be, and this is very powerful, and this is a very powerful last point that we're going to touch on here. The reason, guys, that they're not in those oaks, or if they're in the oaks and you're hunting them, and then that becomes an issue too, where you're bumping them out of there, and now that has sealed the deal on 100% pressure, on a 100%, making a partial 100% nocturnal, is because now you've taken both of their daylight feeding opportunities, your daylight feeding, your huntable opportunities, and you've X'd them out, because you've taken those opportunities right out of the window for you, and you've canceled them out for them. So now they're nocturnal, but they still need the greens. So folks, here is the answer. Here is the it's a very raw truth. They are getting their green requirements, but I'm going to show you where they're at. They're over here on on your neighbor's long linear food plots that have the correct habitat and doe bedding area and a way for them to get around the outsides, the deer. And these unpressured food plots are full of green. That's where they're getting their food plot requirements as far as greens, the neighbors. If they're not on yours, and the more acorns that drop on the ground, they have to eat more greens. Where are they getting the green? And I'm here to tell you that somewhere within your, most of the time it's like in most areas it's like a quarter mile. I can find where they're going for you. Now, if you're in touch with all your neighbors, what you're going to find is somebody in that area is going to be having deer movement on their food plots. So when that happens, if you're all working together, if that neighbor is saying, well, they're still using my food plots, I don't know why they're not on yours, you have to step back. Don't take it personal. You have to step back and you have to think, what's the missing link? So there's a couple of things. One, your food plot's not as powerful as you thought it was, and that's could be because of pressure, and you still haven't 100% taken the hunting out the food plots, or on the food plots, out of it. It could be that your neighbor's brassicas are overpowering your rye, hence the reason that we split the food plots in half brassicas, half greens and grains. We split the plots in half. Even small parcels, and I know that's tough on a lot of smaller acreage, especially small plots, but we split them. It doesn't matter if it's a quarter acre, if it's a half acre, an acre, whatever that food plot is, you split it in half. And that's the reason, is because the sought after food could be what your neighbor has, and if you don't have it, then you're out of the picture, right? Pretty easy. So you have to be able to connect with someone in that area that understands and is willing to relay that information to you. And if you don't have that, that's why just another hurdle that makes hunting small parcels tough. The majority of the neighborly connection between just neighbors, even if there's not a hunt club involved. Just a neighbor here on a 40, neighbor here on an 80, maybe your neighbor's got a couple hundred acres just around the corner, maybe there's a 20 in there, whatever the case is, and they're all stacked up on top of each other all the way around your property. The biggest disconnect is not having that connection with your neighbor and not having the power to find out what those deer, because obviously the deer that are on your 40-acre parcel are not there, or they're not staying on that 40-acre parcel the entire 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, and especially in the fall, is because you're not holding those deer. So they are going somewhere and they're looking for something. There is a missing link in the that you're overlooking that one of the neighbors has. And so you need to start being able to narrow that down to find out what that is or where that problem is, so you can do things such as getting the proper habitat out here on the doe bedding areas closest to that food food plot. There's a reason that we hunt the transition areas in between these two plots. So these are your oak ridges, 1, 2. Instead of having the stands on the oak ridges, we're in the stands off. You're hunting bypass. Your mock scrapes are in your transition areas, and you side access, and that is how you keep the property unpressured. There's a lot of disbelief in this theory, but like I said, there's a couple things. Start thinking about the more acorns that are on the ground, the more that a deer has to have in greens. It's a proven fact. If you don't take it from me, look out in the industry. I can name a couple guys right off the top of my head that you can research, but I won't corner them in this topic. But it doesn't take very long to reach out to somebody that's labeled a deer professional as a deer biologist or whatever the case is, that will back that logic, and that's proof. That's something that you have to understand. They have to have greens. If you don't have the greens, doesn't mean that they're not on it. They're not eating it somewhere. They are eating it somewhere. The key is to be able to have that perfect mixture, that perfect habitat, so you can have the highest percentage of possibility of keeping that mature buck and does on the correct amount of does on your property. That is the key. That's why that small parcel turned 100% nocturnal, is because we chase the movement. We chase the deer off the food plots, then they go to the oaks, so they're more secure, and then they start eating more. They start eating more woody browse. They start eating more hard mast, is because that's an unpressured area, and then we move in and start hunting them, and that's how you lose mature bucks to a very close neighbor. A lot of times is because of that fact of chasing the movement will make a small parcel 100% nocturnal. So take these tips, guys, and study that theory. Keep the cabins, keep the camps, the tents, public land, keep them out to the outside. Keep your food plots long linear to the outside, and keep the center of that property unscathed and untouched, and lay those food plots on the outside. Follow the ridges and hunt those deer going to those destination feed locations that are now in the oaks because of the pressure on the food plots. You have to still hunt those, and that's how you have to hunt the transition areas, and that's how you keep the properties from being 100% nocturnal.